When you follow the road for as far as it will go, the pavement begins to disappear. Soon you'll find yourself on a meandering dirt path to seemingly nowhere. What might you see once night falls? Let's find out in these allegedly true and scary stories that happened on dirt roads. Enjoy, and remember to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. I'm looking for creepy encounters that happened at the Great Lakes or at motels. Also, consider signing up to be an EerieCast Plus member at eriecast.com/plus. It supports us, and you'll unlock ad-free access to all our podcasts, though you still might hear host-read sponsorships. Thank you. Now, let's begin. The Black-Eyed Girl. From Anonymous. At the time of writing this, it was last week that I had a very strange encounter with the BEC, or Black-Eyed Children. It was super creepy to say the least. I lost sleep over it. Now, I may get scared easily, but this was the first time I felt actual fear for my life. I live on a dirt road with not too many houses nearby. I only have a few neighbors, and one of them has kids. It's a really quiet place for the most part, and I used to like that. But ever since this incident occurred, I've been more paranoid than I usually am. It began on one April night. It was pretty warm for a night in the beginning week of April. I live in the south, so it's nothing new. Anyway, it was around 12:40 a.m., and I'm awake, just checking out my YouTube page and watching random stuff. Out of nowhere, I hear my big dog, Bella, beginning to growl at the front door. I have 2 dogs, 3 indoor cats, and 1 outdoor cat. And if you ask me, animals seem to be more sensitive to paranormal stuff than humans are. Anyway, Bella's growling was really unusual. She's a very friendly lab mix and never growls. So I look up from my computer and I could have sworn I saw something through the glass border around my front door. I tried to tell Bella to hush, since the walls were paper thin, and if she started barking, she'd easily wake the rest of my family. Luckily, Bella did calm down when she heard my voice, but she stayed put at the front door anyway. I thought everything was okay after that, but 10 minutes later, not only was Bella growling again, but my cats were all staring at the front door, not blinking for even a second. It's like they were seeing something that I could not see. This time, I got up from my bed, as my bed is in the living room for past medical reasons, and as I took a couple of steps to the door, I heard a light knocking sound. Bella started growling a little louder at this point, and I immediately felt on edge. There was something or someone on the other side of that door. At first, I thought it was a burglar, but our doors are always unlocked, and if that were the case, they would just barge in immediately. I cautiously took a few more steps, and I stood beside Bella. I looked outside, and I saw what looked to be an 8-year-old little girl. She was really pale and wore something that looked to be a 1950s school uniform. But that wasn't the scariest part about her. When I looked closer at her face, her eyes were black. Every single bit of her eyes, solid black. I felt my heart beginning to pound faster as she knocked again. Since there are 2 doors at the front entrance, I opened the inside door and asked her what she was doing out so late. She didn't answer me, but instead asked me if she could come in. What scared me was the way she asked it. There was a level of confidence in her tone that shouldn't have been there. Normally, if you're a kid late at night wanting help, you'd be nervous, you'd be scared, and that would be reflected in your tone of voice. But this girl spoke with confidence. I just stared at her for a few seconds before she asked again. This time she said my first name, along with her question. I immediately locked the outside door and shut the inside door, locking it too before going to the door that led to the garage. As I was about to lock it, I heard her voice coming from the outside of the garage. She said, "Please let me in, miss. I won't hurt you." This scared the crap out of me so much that I froze. After a minute, which seemed like hours, I snapped out of my trance and locked the garage door. I then ran back to my bed, pulling the covers over myself like a frightened child. Still, I could hear her knocking every 5 seconds, asking to be let in. My cats were going nuts at this point, hissing at the doors. Bella was growling louder too. The animal's growling must have scared this little girl away, because I no longer heard her knocking anymore. Naturally, I didn't sleep at all that night, and I couldn't sleep much for the next few days either, only falling asleep for an hour before waking up in a panic. Whenever I did fall asleep for that 1 hour, I swear I could hear her voice calling my name, and I could see those black eyes of hers. It's been a week since this happened, and I haven't seen or heard from this strange girl again. I've read stories and knew enough to never let these children into your home. I'm glad I didn't. I have a feeling that if I did, I'd be locked in a mental hospital from going insane, or worse. I was glad to encounter a creature in the woods. From Anonymous. Longtime follower, first-time poster. I've always really enjoyed the outdoors, hiking, and even more the thought of exploring old abandoned places. At a certain point, I got into researching about the mining history around where I lived, and realized there were a lot of places I could still see. I live in Colorado, and the state had a mining boom in the early 20th century, which left a lot of abandoned mines behind, which is a perfect result for me. I try to avoid the kind of mines that are toured and well kept. I look for the kind of mine which is deep in some remote part of the wilderness, where I know there will be nothing but me and that frozen moment of time when the place was abandoned. Unfortunately, a lot of these places collapse due to age, so for the most part, these expeditions are a big disappointment. You do so much research and preparation only to get to a pile of rubble. Needless to say, when an intact mine is found, I get full of excitement. In 2017, I finally found the perfect prospect. Deep into the mountains, 10 miles at the end of an old dirt road, sat a mine shaft seemingly intact from records and satellite imagery. It was secluded enough to have been kept the same since its last use. I got really excited with this find. The thought of being able to be the first person to visit a site in decades made me prepare for a scouting trip as soon as I possibly could. On that same week, I drove my car on an afternoon to the closed-off part of the road that leads to the mine with my bicycle and headed off. It was 10 miles each way through mountainous terrain, and as it was only a reconnaissance trip for now, I took nothing more than a bottle of water. It was a long bike ride there, but after biking up through some very old, steep, and hidden mining trails, I finally found the shaft. I was exhilarated when I saw it. Not only to have found it, but to actually be able to confirm that it was accessible and intact. The entrance itself had a lot of dirt from the mountain covering it, so the amount of space I had to get into it was barely enough for a person to be able to crawl through. The thought then came to me that the mine might possibly be filled because of the dirt, so I peeked inside to be able to see how it was. The walls looked fine, and I couldn't see the end of it, which is a good thing, since it means there's a lot to explore, and that's exactly what I look for. As I examined the tunnel, I could hear some distinct, heavy breathing noises. Black bears are not uncommon in the area, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of them was taking shelter in there from the heavy rains we get in the summertime. Having listened to enough of people's scary stories already, I decided it would be wiser to come back at a later time with more equipment, and hopefully whatever was in there would be gone by the time I came back. I hopped back on my bicycle and went back to my car, then I went home. After a few weeks had gone by, me and a buddy rounded up all the gear we needed. This time we drove out on our dirt bikes. We made the trip back right after school on the first Friday available. Same thing as last time. We drove up the dirt road, got on our bikes, and headed off towards the mine. By the time we got to the entrance, the sun was about to set, so we turned on our headlamps and first of all inspected the tunnel again. We were both relieved to not hear any signs of whatever animal it was that was there the last time I visited, so we began our exploration. We walked in and were amazed at what we saw. Almost intact shafts, signs of an old era, and pickaxes all around us. The tunnel kept on going for a long time, and even had a vertical shaft, which we explored for a bit. After exploring all that we could, we decided to finally pack up and drive back to the car, despite the fact that it was pitch black outside, and we had nothing but our headlamps to guide us back. Once we made it there, we breathed a sigh of relief and of accomplishment for finally having been able to explore the kind of mine that we were searching for. In all, it was a pretty tiring day, so before we loaded the motorcycles back up, we just sat around the car and talked for a bit. Other cars drove past our turn on the dirt road every 15 minutes or so, but nothing unusual for the area, even for it being pretty late at night. One of the cars that was driving through was driving slower than usual, which we thought nothing of, until it turned off into where we were parked. Now, you have to understand that this turn we were on was very unknown to people, and it was a dead end, so it's not like people are going anywhere in particular when they park here, especially in the late hours of the night. Until that point, we thought nothing of it. Maybe they were parking to smoke something, or just to hang out. I don't know. So as they drove into the dead end, we stood up and turned our headlights on and looked at them, as to let them know that we were here, and to let them park without hitting my car. But as soon as they saw we were there, their vehicle stopped about 5 yards away from us. We waved at them and gestured to park over there, but nothing happened. The car just stayed there in front of us with the engine running, windows up, headlights shining on our faces. We began to realize that we were also hearing what sounded like muffled screams and banging coming from their trunk. My friend and I stood there, like an old Western standoff against this other car, both of us facing these people in a car in the middle of the woods at night. Now it was at this moment that I felt relieved to have met that creature on my mine scouting trip. You see, because it was there last time, and I wasn't sure if it'd be gone this time, I'd brought with me a pistol for protection in case anything happened. After what felt like the longest moments of my life, I remembered that and placed my hand over my pistol on my belt to signify to whoever was in that car that now they were making us feel not as friendly anymore. After a few seconds, when they noticed my sidearm, the car began to very slowly back up onto the main dirt road. It waited there a while and then drove off into the night. I kept my hand over my gun for a few seconds after that to make sure that they were really gone, and only then did I calm down. My friend and I sat down and asked each other, "Dude, what the heck was that?" After a few minutes, we collected ourselves and began to laugh about the whole thing, reasoning that it might have been just a bunch of college kids trying to find somewhere to camp and drink. Not long afterwards, we almost forgot about the whole thing and started talking about our little adventure in the mine, when suddenly we hear a car drive by us about 20 minutes after our bizarre encounter. It begins to slow down and stops right before the turnout where we parked. It was that same car again. The car just stood there like it did before. Not a single thing was heard, and they just stayed there, parked. After a few minutes, they drove off, but this time my buddy and I looked at each other, and although neither of us said anything, I think we were both thinking the same thing, because we never loaded our bikes in the car as quick as we did then. As soon as we were back in the car, we sped off, not wanting to see if we would have had a third encounter with whoever that was in the strange car in the middle of the woods. I've listened to a lot of Redditors' stories, but this was the first time I was glad to have met a creature in the woods. If it wasn't for whatever I'd ran into on that first scouting trip, I never would have brought my gun that night. And who knows, if that were the case, it might have ended up being me and my friend screaming from the trunk of that car. I've been back to that wooded area plenty of times since then, and nothing that bizarre has ever happened to me again, thankfully. The Figures in the Woods, from Daniel_7SE. This happened to me a couple of weeks ago. It was a Friday, just like any other normal day at first. I made my plan to get off the bus at 4:20 p.m., then leave home for my friend's house at 5:30 p.m. So I got ready to go, and it was about 5:22. My mom asked me if I was walking, and I said yeah, but in reality I was walking to the woods to get the bike my friends let me use. The reason that I have to do this is because my grandma doesn't like my friends or their stuff on the property. So I grabbed my water, my knife, and gloves, then walked out into the woods. Eventually, I got to the spot where I'd hid the bike. I got on and started towards my friend's house. My friend's place is a good 20-minute drive from my house. I figured I'd get the most out of my trip there and back by staying a couple of hours. I made it there around 6:10 and put the bike up against their house. I knocked on the door and they let me in. A couple of hours later, around 8:42 p.m., I was saying my goodbyes and I headed for home. Now by then it was pitch black outside, and all I had was my phone with me, along with my knife. I'm riding home, and I have to take a very sketchy road. After that, I have to cross a highway to get to the dirt road leading to my house. Whenever I turn on this road, I seem to always feel like I'm being watched from the woods and the fields. I stopped for but a moment to turn my phone light on. Then I continued to ride down the path slowly, but not too slow. I reached a stop sign and turned there. There I began the long ride down the dirt road to my house. About 10 minutes later, I got to the woods of my grandma's property. I heard then what sounded like human footsteps in the woods. At this point, I was very anxious. Then the noises stopped. I called out, "Hello? Is anybody there?" Silence was all I got in return, until I began to hear the sound of moving bushes in front of me. What I saw still haunts me to this day. I saw a white figure, almost like a man, but his face was a bit off. His face was all stretched, like his head didn't fit or something. He had a hideous set of rotten teeth as he grinned at me from the bush. I knew I had to get in the woods to hide my bike, so I went on my other trail that leads to a fort that I'd made with dark green camo netting. But when I walked over towards that trail, it sounded like something was following me every move I made, because whenever I stopped, I heard it stop too. I got to the trail and I hesitated for a second before going in. I got the nerve to take 4 steps in. That's when I saw another figure. This one wasn't right either. It was 8 feet tall, and this person was dressed in all black clothing, reminding me of the Grim Reaper. I froze, and I soon saw the thing's face turn to look at me. But by the time it looked at me, I had noped out of there and ran across the yard to the gun range we had. I put the bike behind the shed that was out there in the woods. After I did that, I began to walk to my house. But then I had the great idea to look back. I quickly regretted it. I saw multiple black figures in the woods this time. This was accompanied with a feeling that my life was in danger and I had to run. So I did. I didn't see them again that night, and that was my experience seeing those figures in the woods. The Demon at the Mosque. From Dogsrule. This story is from my cousin who lives in Iran, and it's probably one of the scariest stories I've ever heard. My aunt has a home in a rural village in Zanjan, Iran. When I say rural, I really do mean rural. The closest store is a 30-minute drive on a dirt road. Her village is in the desert and has no Wi-Fi or electricity, so it's very easy to get bored there. My family and I will sometimes go over to her home and spend the night as a group. When my cousin was 16, he was staying in the village and got very bored. It was easy to get bored, since there wasn't really anything to do. My aunt told him that there was a mosque and graveyard nearby, but it was about a half-hour walk away. My cousin didn't mind. He just wanted something to do. He set out for his walk along the empty dirt road and eventually made it to the mosque. He spent some time exploring there and looking around, but eventually he found the graveyard. For some odd reason, he went around reading the names on the tombstones. It's important to note that he had begun reading names on tombstones in the afternoon. However, though it didn't feel like a long time, when he looked away from the tombstones, it was already midnight. He was in shock. He recalled thinking he'd only been there for 10 minutes. He quickly got up and began to make his way home, but something didn't seem right at all. After a bit of walking, my cousin noticed that he was lost in the pitch black dark. He quickly became more alert, trying to see if there was any way he could get directions. Then, in the distance, my cousin saw a man walking towards him down the dirt road. My cousin felt relieved. There was someone he could ask for help. As the man got closer, my cousin noticed he was carrying what seemed to be a baby, or at least something small in a baby's blanket. The man also had a very large stomach, was bald, and very ugly. When the man was about 3 feet away from my cousin started to open his mouth to greet the man. But as soon as he did, the man disappeared, and he was nowhere to be seen. Frightened, my cousin paused, confused and scared. Suddenly, he heard hoofprints right behind him. It sounded like a small horse. My cousin looked back toward the sound. He saw the man walking away from him, but when he looked further down, the man didn't have human legs. Instead, he had hooves. My cousin screamed, and he ran as fast as he could, praying aloud as he did. He ran so far until he was out of breath. He stopped to catch his breath and spotted a group of women wearing black chadors, a Muslim all-black head covering that covers the whole body. The women were off in the distance to the side, sitting in a circle and praying. Suddenly, one of them got up and flew past him, so fast he could barely see it, like a huge gust of wind. Then she sat back down, praying. My cousin started to run and scream again. He ran and ran until he saw a car coming his way. He waved down the car and got a ride home from the driver. New Dogman Encounter from Devil Dog 4200. I live in the southern part of Georgia. This encounter took place in September of last year, 2020 as of writing this. I've always been a believer in the paranormal and other cryptids, mostly believing them to be creatures that haven't yet been proven to exist. When I was 16, I had an experience while driving that was posted to Dark Stories and featured on the Darkness Prevails YouTube channel. To recap, I was driving a red square-body Nissan pickup on my way home from my girlfriend's house. As I was driving home, I noticed a black mass on the edge of the road that I assumed to be debris or an unfortunate dead animal, until this thing darted into the woods before I could blink. A few seconds down the road, something jumped into the bed of the truck and just started going ham back there. The only real look I got of the thing before it jumped out was its face. It was wolf-like, black fur, yellowish-orange eyes, and its head was far too big to be of a dog or coyote, not like the ones around here, and we don't have wolves. The day after my dad saw the damage and confronted me about it, I knew he wouldn't believe a great big dog attacked the truck, so I said a tree branch fell on top of it while I was driving. I know he didn't believe me, but he didn't protest either. Now on to my most recent encounter. Since then, I've finished my years at the Marine Corps and currently work for a painters union. However, due to global events, a lot of work is being postponed or altogether canceled, so I have a lot of time to spend with family. One family member in particular, my brother. For this, I'll call him Gator. One thing he enjoys doing is walking our grandfather's property, surrounding woods and dirt roads at night. It's a good way to clear our heads, talk, and catch up on things. This particular night, we walked the 10-acre field, then proceeded down the driveway to the dirt road. The house is out in the boondocks, so it's mostly fields or woods. The driveway is roughly a quarter mile, bordered by cedar trees on either side. The dirt road cuts left sharply and is bordered by thick woods on both sides. Halfway down the driveway, I began to notice just how eerily quiet it was. No crickets, frogs, or anything of the sort. I wasn't sure how I hadn't noticed it before, as we were already out for at least an hour. Anyone who hunts or spends a lot of time in wooded areas will know silence is nature's way of saying something else is out here hunting. I asked Gator if he noticed, and he didn't say anything, just nodded. I couldn't help but notice he continued looking over his shoulder. We continued on down the dirt road, albeit a bit more cautiously, until we grew complacent with the silence and began to talk again. We went on like this for another half hour, talking about games, cars, girls, and randomly generated topics. Gator was in the middle of speaking when I heard leaves crunching from our left. I stopped to listen, but then there was nothing. I asked Gator if he had heard it, and he said no. At this point, we continued walking silently. This time, he heard it, but I didn't. The faint sound of someone stepping through the leaves next to him. We decided not to test our luck and turned to head back when we heard the leaves rustling violently now, as though something ran back into the woods. Despite not hearing or seeing anything, I felt as if something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up or lag behind. Gator could feel it too, and that feeling persisted all the way back into the house. Once inside, we calmed down and decided to play some Call of Duty. Not any of the new stuff, but we decided to play a throwback to World at War Zombies. We're geeks, I know, but it's fun nonetheless. We played for hours, until around 2:30 a.m., when I went out to my truck to get my phone charger. I made my way over to the back door leading out into the field, where the cedar tree-lined driveway was to the right. My truck was roughly 50 yards from the door. As I stepped outside, it immediately felt off, as though danger was waiting for me. I brushed it off, ignored the silence, and walked through the yard into the field where it was parked. But before even touching the handle of the vehicle door, I heard a grunt-like huff from the edge of the cedar trees lining the driveway. I assumed it was a deer, but I looked over, and when I did, I was petrified. Standing just outside the tree line in the moonlight was that face. Black fur, wolfish head, yellowish-orange eyes. This time I could see it in full view on all fours. It really did look like a huge wolf, and it was staring right at me. I just knew it had to be the same one. I wanted to run, but then I watched it stand up on two legs, and somehow I found it even harder to move. Judging from its face, I know it's hard to believe, but I swear it recognized me. It remembered me. With a low growl, it took a small step towards me. Now that I look back on this, I think it was testing my aggressiveness like some dogs or wolves would. I still couldn't budge. However, when this thing curled its wolfish lips into what I can only describe as a sadistic smile, I finally broke and ran back into the house, forgetting my charger. It didn't even try to chase me. I feel like it was toying with me. After some time to calm down, I finally explained to Gator what I saw. He didn't call me crazy, and he didn't disbelieve me. I've grown up around the paranormal. I've imagined what I saw in my truck rearview mirror, wondering what it could have possibly been, wondering what it was I saw that night. But I hope I never have to see it again. Just because something hasn't been proven to exist doesn't mean it's not out there. After all, the gorilla was folklore for nearly 100 years before it was proven to exist. There are things out there, and some of them are the stuff of nightmares. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.